Mr. John Redwood.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak for prosperity, not austerity. I speak for England as well as more powers for Scotland. And I speak for greater democracy as we cease to wrestle power back from the bureaucratic tentacles of Brussels. Austerity, Mr. Speaker, is what was given to this country in 2008 and 9. Then we had desperate austerity. We had deep recession. We had the biggest loss of national income at any time since the Second World War. We had families losing jobs, families losing bonuses, families having to take pay cuts. We saw austerity rampant. And since 2010, first the coalition and now the government, led ably by my right honourable friend Prime Minister, is about restoring prosperity for the many, growth to our economy, the extra jobs we need, the higher pay, the better living standards which come from creating that world of opportunity. We don't just speak for prosperity, but yes, we speak for aspiration. And we speak for aspiration just as surely as some opposites spoke for envy in the general election and were told by the electors that they didn't want envy, they wanted aspiration. They don't mind other people doing well as long as they have a chance to do well. They're not jealous of people who go to good schools, but they want to go to a good school or send their own children to a good school for themselves. They're not jealous of people who work hard and earn a lot of money and want to keep a lot of that money to spend on themselves. They want that opportunity to do that for themselves as well. And I urge my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, and his colleague, the Chancellor, to press on with those very aims, that it is spreading that prosperity ever more widely that lifts us from austerity and banishes austerity from our land.
Before the banking crisis hit in 2008, he was calling for less regulation of the banking system. Does he still hold that position?
Yeah. He dares to read the Economic Policy Review, which I submitted to my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. It very clearly warned of a banking crash. It said that Labour's regulatory system, introduced by his party after the 1997 general election, was not requiring enough cash and capital to be held by the banks, and that was causing enormous strains which would go wrong. I saw it coming, he took it down. That party opposite changed the regulatory system, the regulators made a huge mistake, and the banking system powered the recession, which was also furthered by the mistaken budgetary policies pursued by the party opposite. And I'm very pleased to see that those who now wish to represent the Labour Party as its leader have now said sorry for the economic and regulatory mistakes that his party makes. If he wants another go, by all means.
Because one of the myths that was put around is that the Labour government maxed out on the credit card. Can you just confirm one thing, that the debt as a proportion of the country's GDP before the banking crisis hit in 2008 was lower than what we inherited in 1997?
What matters is the rate of change, and they were borrowing too much at a time when the economy was overheating and collecting a lot of tax revenue, and we have been trying to put to right that mistake ever since. But I think it would be helpful in this Parliament if we could have a more grown-up discussion about public spending and tax revenues than we were allowed in the last Parliament. Because now austerity has shifted from meaning the disaster that hit living standards and individual families in 2008 to a narrower definition. Austerity now to the so-called progressive parties means not increasing public spending as quickly as they think it should be increased. So let me just remind the House of what the successive red books, budget books, told us about what happened between 2010 and 2015 and what they tell us will happen, subject to the Chancellor's budget shortly, between 2015 and 2020. It is very simple to remember. Between 2010 and 2015, the coalition government increased total public spending by £1,000 per person per year, taking the final year of the 5 years compared with the starting point. And the Conservative government recently elected plans to do exactly the same thing this Parliament. It also wishes to increase total public spending per head by £1,000 a person a year by the end of this Parliament compared with the beginning. Not a huge rate of growth, but it is not an overall decline or a cut. And what has also happened, because we inherited such an enormous deficit and couldn't carry on borrowing on that scale, is that as a result of VAT increases and the general increase in revenue from some economic growth, we're now charging people £2,000 a head more per year at the end of the last Parliament than the last Labour government did in its last year. And this Parliament requires exactly the same increase without any rate rises, but coming from faster growth in the economy. The aim of the Red Book is that we should charge everybody £2,000 extra a year by the end of the Parliament compared with the beginning. I think that is a measured and sensible proposal to get us out of enormous borrowing and a big debt hole, and I think it can work, and I particularly welcome the fact that this time it can take place with no tax rises.
The honourable member may know that the number of people earning over £20,000 is now 800,000 people less than it was in 2010. And those higher paying jobs have been chopped up into little part-time, low-wage and zero-hours jobs. And that's why the tax revenues aren't coming in. That's why debt as the share of the GDP has gone from 55% to 80%. Admit it, you've failed.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's a bit rich from the party that crashed the car and did all the damage to living standards in 2008. Would I like it to be going faster? You bet I'd like it to be going faster. So I'm sure would the Prime Minister like it to be going faster, but it has to go at a pace that can be achievable without taking risks and without making it worse in the way that Labour did. My party is not the party of low pay. We want people to be better paid. It's just that we have an economic policy that may deliver better pay. Their policy clearly didn't, because they drove people out of work, they abolished the bonuses, they drove the wages down by their dreadful recession. And that recession was caused by a combination of their mistaken economic policy and, above all, by their mistaken misregulation of the banks. They should have stuck with the regulation of the banks that we had before '97. We never did anything like that with the banking system. We never had a run on a major bank under the Conservatives. We never had a big recession created by a banking crash. So they need to understand the history and understand that in future you have to follow different policies to try and avoid that. But, Mr. Speaker, I also wish to speak for England, and I'm very pleased that in the gracious speech it says that there will be early progress in making sure that those MPs elected for England can make more of the decisions that relate only to England. And I hear the SNP already saying that it should be in legislation. I think it is entirely right that in the first instance it should be done by amending the standing orders of this House of Commons. It can be done simply and quickly, and it is judge-proof, and it is proof from challenges from outside this place. If we want a sovereign parliament, sometimes this parliament has to act in a sovereign way, and that surely we can be sovereign over our own votes and procedures. I give way.
Well, gentleman's a big champion of Parliament and parliamentary procedures. Surely he agrees that we have to debate this. There has to be a bill. There has to be legislation. It is not good enough to change the standing orders of the House for something so constitutionally important.
My goodness.
Of course, there will be a debate on it, and the SNP can use all the parliamentary procedures, which some of them know well, to make sure that it is properly scrutinised and debated. But we don't need a great piece of legislation. We just need an agreement on who votes on what. It's not that complicated. It is extremely popular outside this House. It was clearly offered to the British people by the Conservative Party. It was one of several policies we had in our manifesto, which was about twice as popular as the Conservative Party was. And we were the most popular party in an election when people didn't really like any of the parties very much. But they backed us, but they backed some of our policies rather more.
Just to support the extremely relevant comments of my right honourable friend, of course the legislation has already been passed in the form of the Devolution Act in 1997. That's what devolved the functions. That is the reason why it's necessary to make sure that through our standing orders it is fair for the British people, or the English people, to know that the English people to know that they get exclusive rights over their own legislation.
Yes, I'm grateful to my honourable friend and those who say we haven't thought this through. We wrote many papers on it in opposition. We thought it through over a 15-year period. It was in the 2001 Conservative Manifesto, so this should come as no surprise to anyone interested in the subject or who's been following the debates. But the third point I wish to support strongly in the gracious speech is that at last we will get a referendum on our relationship with the European Union. And any honest government picking up the task today should say to the British people that we do need a new relationship, because now the euro is driving so many of the changes in the European Union. Those in the euro need much closer and stronger centralised government. They need to stand behind each other rather more. They're going to need common benefit systems. They're going to need common cash transfer systems. They're going to need to send support from the richer to the poorer areas, just as we do within our union of the United Kingdom. If one part falls on hard times, the other parts pay more tax and send them the money. There is a mutual insurance or solidarity system which should appeal to all those of a socialist mind. It even appeals to me, because I think when you're down on your luck within a union, you should be supported by others in the union. The United Kingdom very clearly has never elected a party to government that wants to join the euro, quite rightly so. The public have no appetite to join the euro. They have no wish to start raising more tax in Britain to send to Greece or to Portugal or Spain, although they desperately need financial assistance. And so, of course, we need to define a new relationship with the emerging close centralised political union of which our Euro colleagues in the EU now speak all too often. And so I'm very pleased that my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is taking on this difficult and tricky task. And there will be a range of views within parties and between parties on this issue, so a referendum will be a very good way of making the final decision. But I would urge my right honourable friend to just have this in mind, that what the British people and many in this Parliament want is to restore our right, the British people's right to make up their minds, and their MPs' rights to then make sure the view of the British people is reflected in what happens here. At the moment, it is about borders and immigration and welfare systems, and the British people have expressed a strong view for change on those in the general election, and we need ministers who can deliver those changes, but some of those changes are not legal or possible under our current EU arrangements. But in the future, it may be something else that the British people want to see change. They might want cheaper energy, for example, and they would then discover that their politicians are not entirely able to deliver that because energy is hedged around with many European rules, laws and requirements. So what we need is some way in which, if something is of consummate importance to the British people, and if their elected ministers are not currently able to do it because of European rules, that Britain has a way of doing this. And I think whilst we can do it because we're not in the euro, and we can probably get a special deal because we're not in the euro, because it does relate to how much centralised government they're going to take to themselves in the euro, which we need to keep out of, if they did want to adopt it more widely, they might find it helps with their other problems. Because we are seeing at the moment a series of collisions between the elected will of peoples in countries like Greece and maybe Spain, based on their local election results, and what the European establishment is dishing up by way of policy. If those opposite who dislike austerity want to study austerity, they should look at what has happened to Greece, where you've had very large public expenditure cuts that I wouldn't have supported, at a time when their economy was imploding, their banking system was broken, and their GDP has actually fallen by 25% since 2008. Imagine how we would feel if that had been inflicted on us by policies from Brussels. Thank heavens those of us who made the case against the euro persuaded others to keep us out, because there, but for the grace of God, went Britain into a euro scheme which can deliver untold damage and austerity. Who would want 50% youth unemployment? But that is what they have in several parts of southern Europe now, thanks to this devastating austerity machine that is the euro. So I urge my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, to take advantage of our non-membership to negotiate a democratic settlement for us, which means that if we need something for our prosperity, this House can deliver it. Yeah.